Imagine cruising at 35,000 feet in the plush calm of first class, only to be struck by an act so shocking it shatters the illusion of safety in the skies. Simone Hayes, a seasoned FBI civil rights investigator, boarded flight AA-2045 expecting peace after a grueling week away from home. But when the captain tailored uniform, 4 gold stripes leaned forward and spat in her face, everything changed. What compels a woman of her poise and compassion to confront blatant racism high above the earth? How does she turn a moment of humiliation into the spark that ignites industry-wide reform? And who among the witnesses will risk their comfort to stand with her, from the tense first-class microaggressions to the courtroom drama that followed? Simone's journey is one of courage under pressure. She must weigh the temptation of a private settlement against the moral imperative to demand accountability. As the skies themselves bear witness, Simone's resolve will determine whether justice simply soars or crashes. If you believe every passenger deserves dignity at any altitude, hit like, share this video, and subscribe now to follow Simone Hayes' incredible story. The soft chime of the seatbelt sign flickered on just as the engines hummed into a steady drone. The cabin lights dimmed to a gentle glow, inviting a hush among the passengers. Simone Hayes sat in her window seat, eyes closed for a moment, savoring the brief calm. She had booked this first-class ticket with careful intention to find a pocket of peace before a demanding week in Washington. Yet as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, she sensed that serenity might be hard to come by today. Above her, the cabin ceiling arched like a vault, lined with overhead bins securely latched. A soft whir of air vents provided a constant background noise. The rows of plush seats glimmered under recessed lighting. Simone shifted slightly and glanced around. First class looked every bit the sanctuary she had hoped for. Other passengers reclined comfortably, some engrossed in novels, others scrolling on tablets. A flight attendant moved with quiet efficiency down the aisle, offering bottled water and warm smiles. But something in the way he glanced at Simone made her heart skip a beat. The bottle of water sat unopened on her tray table. Simone reached for it, noting the condensation beating on the plastic. She ran a finger along the side of the bottle, thinking back to her grandmother's advice. Evelyn Brooks had always told her that a calm mind could find clarity even in chaos. Simone had carried those words into the FBI Academy at Quantico and across countless investigations. Now, more than ever, she needed that clarity. A delicate turbulence rattled the plane gently, reminding every passenger that they were at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. A subtle wobble rocked the cabin. The flight attendant steadied himself by gripping the back of a seat and offered a polite apology over the soft hush of the engines. The baby a few rows back let out a startled cry. Simone felt a flicker of anxiety, a reaction she rarely allowed herself. She took a deliberate breath in through her nose, holding it for a moment before exhaling slowly. The world stabilized, if only for a heartbeat. She thought of her grandmother's weathered hands and the way Evelyn had squeezed her daughter's fingers for reassurance during chemotherapy treatments. Those hands had an almost magical quality, soothing worries with a single touch. The seatbelt sign dinged again, flickering off. The flight attendant moved on to the next passenger, offering a nod and a kind word. Simone gave a small, appreciative smile and reached for her notebook. A slim, leather-bound pad filled with neatly written notes. She had intended to jot down observations for her upcoming briefing, but the page remained blank as she stared out the window. Below, a blanket of white clouds stretched to the horizon, illuminated by the sun's angle. It looked tranquil, peaceful, timeless. Up here, though, The boundaries between calm and chaos felt alarmingly thin. She closed her notebook and let her fingertips brush the smooth cover. Tonight, she would meet with Assistant Director Carter to debrief on the spike in civil rights complaints across the eastern seaboard. Tonight, she would have to put aside any personal distraction, like her grandmother's uncertain prognosis, and focus entirely on the case files. But that promise felt distant now. The gentle bumping of the plane undercut her resolve, reminding her that even meticulous planning could be upended by an unexpected gust of wind. She glanced at the clock display on the overhead panel. It read 10:35 in the morning, Pacific time. Another 16 hours until she could see her grandmother again. A soft murmur rose among the passengers as the flight attendant returned, offering warm towels and the in-flight menu. Simone accepted the towel with a polite thank you and unfolded it across her lap. She studied the menu briefly before setting it aside. She wanted to stay alert, to observe. Her job demanded nothing less. But for now, she allowed herself to notice small details. The slight crease in the aisle carpet where the seat track met the floor. The faint aroma of roasted nuts wafting through the cabin. The muted click of seat belts as people adjusted in their seats. These were the textures of air travel, the rhythms of a journey suspended above the earth. Her thoughts drifted to her grandmother once more. How many flights had Evelyn taken in her lifetime? How many hours had she spent soaring through circuits of worry and hope? Simone remembered the first time her grandmother had flown to Washington to watch her graduate. Evelyn had clutched Simone's hand so tightly, Simone had worried her grandmother might crush her fingers by accident. But that grip, firm and unwavering, had become a symbol of support. It had guided Simone through the darkest days of her training. And now, the memory brought a gentle warmth to her chest, softening the edge of her apprehension. The plane shuddered again, slightly more pronounced this time. A distant rumble, like water sloshing in a deep channel, echoed through the cabin. Some passengers gasped. Others glanced around, searching for reassurance in the faces of strangers. Simone inhaled steadily and let her mind center on the here and now. She placed her hand on the armrest and felt the reassuring solidity of its structure. She reminded herself that control could be relinquished in moments like these, but courage could still be summoned. Her grandmother's words whispered in her ear once more. Courage, my child, comes from the heart even when the world trembles. The seatbelt sign dinged on once more, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, crisp and calm. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing unexpected turbulence as we pass through a high-altitude wind shear. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts securely fastened. Your safety is our top priority. Simone listened to the measured tone of the captain's announcement. She recognized him as Captain Robert Sinclair, though she had not seen him in person yet. She noted the professionalism of his voice, even as it carried a subtle undercurrent of tension. He would soon make his way through this cabin, greeting each passenger in first class one by one. Simone closed her eyes for a moment to steady herself. Above the roar of the engines, the gentle syllables of her grandmother's wisdom repeated like a mantra. Find your center. Hold your ground. Speak your truth. She reached for her water bottle again and finally lifted it to her lips. The cold liquid soothed her throat as she drank. When she set the bottle down, she ran her index finger along its edge as though tracing a line drawn between past and future. From this height, there was no turning back. Every decision, every observation would matter, and she would remain vigilant. Characters in this part. Simone Hayes. The soft chime of the seatbelt sign sparkled on just as the engine settled into a constant hum. The cabin lights dimmed to a gentle glow. inviting a hush among the passengers. Simone Hayes sat by the window, eyes closed for a moment, savoring a breath of calm. She had booked this first-class ticket with careful intention to carve out a pocket of peace before a demanding week in Washington, D.C. Yet as the plane leveled off, cruising among wispy clouds, she sensed that serenity might prove elusive today. Above her, the ceiling arched like a vaulted sky, rows of air vents humming evenly overhead. The plush leather seats glimmered under recessed lights. Simone shifted in her seat and glanced around, taking in the small details. A businessman in 1B tapped intently on his tablet. In 1C, a retired judge adjusted his reading glasses over a thick paperback. A flight attendant passed by with a trolley of warm towels and menus printed on heavy cardstock. Everything felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Still, something in the attendant's courteous nod stopped short when he caught Simone's gaze. Her heart fluttered with a familiar twinge of unease. She reached for the bottle of water on her tray, noting the condensation along its side. As she twisted the cap, her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Clarity comes when you breathe deeply, even when the world shakes. Evelyn Brooks had told her the night before. Simone had carried that advice through Quantico and every tense investigation she had led since. Today, up here with nothing but open sky outside, she needed that clarity more than ever. A gentle bump rippled through the fuselage, like a hand shaking the plane's hull. The flight attendant steadied the trolley against the seat back and called out in a calm voice that masked a hint of apology. The baby behind Simone cried in alarm. She drew a slow breath in through her nose, held it for 3 counts, then exhaled. The momentary panic subsided. She thought of Evelyn's weathered hands, how they had squeezed her daughters in quiet support through chemotherapy. Those hands had offered so much strength. Simone felt gratitude for that memory, as if an anchor kept her steady. The seatbelt sign chimed off again, and the flight attendant continued down the aisle, offering refreshments with practiced grace. Danny Simone managed a small smile and accepted her warm towel. She unfurled it and laid it across her lap, the steam curling in faint spirals. She studied the in-flight menu out of habit, but her mind was elsewhere. She let her fingertips brush the leather cover of her notebook, empty of notes for now. She imagined the rows of documents she would face tonight at the FBI Civil Rights Division briefing. Evidence of hate crimes rising across the eastern seaboard. Every file a story of injustice. Tonight she would set aside any personal distraction, her grandmother's treatment, the uncertainty hovering over their family, and focus on the work. But something told her this flight would be more than a commute. Faint murmurs stirred as a new passenger boarded. Simone looked up to see a tech entrepreneur being greeted with a warm handshake by the captain. Simone recognized him from the local news, Alicia Chen. Chen settled into 1B, exchanged pleasantries with the crew, her laughter light and genuine. A few nods and smiles later, Simone returned her attention to the clouds outside. From this vantage, the world seemed infinite, yet fragile. One gust could shift the plane's path in an instant. Her watch buzzed softly. A text from her partner at the bureau flashed on the small screen. Safe flight. Let me know when you land. Simone thumbed a reply. All good so far. Might be a long one. She slipped the phone aside and refocused, observing without bias, listening without judgment. Her grandmother's lessons had taught her empathy, that every person carried unseen burdens. Simone settled into that space between mind and heart, ready to notice even minor anomalies. The cabin lights dimmed further. and a soft instrumental track played over the speakers. The ambient melody felt comforting, like a memory half remembered. Simone closed her eyes, allowing the music to wash over her. She felt a sense of unity in the gentle vibration of the sound, as if everyone on board was linked by the same invisible thread. Yet she could still feel that slight edge of being the only person of color in first class. It was not the ache of isolation, but a quiet reminder of difference. Another ripple of turbulence shivered through the cabin. A low drone underscored the shift. The seatbelt sign clicked on. Simone's muscles tensed instinctively. She squeezed her notebook to her chest and inhaled deeply. This plane was now beyond her control, yet she had navigated every twist and turn in her career by centering herself in moments like these. She allowed her gaze to soften, noticing the way light scattered across the window's curved surface. Each drop of sunlit condensation became a fleeting spark against the blue beyond. A gentle footstep sounded behind her. Simone felt a presence and turned to see the co-pilot pausing by her row, clipboard in hand. He offered a nod of acknowledgement, eyes steady, professional. "Enjoying the flight, Ms. Hayes?" he asked in a voice that held no condescension. Simone returned the nod. "So far, so good." His lips curved in a brief half-smile. Then he moved on. Simone watched him disappear and felt a small thrill of reassurance. Here, in this cocoon of polished service, someone had looked at her without hesitation or doubt. Just then the captain's voice came through the speakers, measured, calm, authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing moderate turbulence as we pass through a weather front. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until further notice. Your safety is our highest priority." The announcement felt reassuring until Simone caught a subtle inflection. Something in the phrasing hinted at impatience, as if the captain considered any interruption of protocol a personal affront. The music faded, and hush returned. Simone's fingers unfurled from the notebook. She thought of her grandmother again. At 75, tall and dignified, Evelyn had fought her battles with quiet strength. She had taught Simone that dignity was not given. It was claimed through persistence and courage. And so Simone pressed her palms against the armrests and braced herself for what lay ahead. The turbulence subsided after a few minutes, and the seatbelt sign clicked off once more. The cabin lights brightened slightly, and the flight attendant resumed her rounds. Simone accepted a cup of herbal tea, its warmth soothing. She stirred gently, watching the steam rise. She reminded herself that attention to small comforts was not indulgence, but preservation of her own resilience. Beyond the window, high above the earth, an eagle's vantage revealed a mosaic of clouds and blue. Simone sipped her tea and let her shoulders soften. The flight had begun with a whisper that something was off, a series of small tremors that hinted at greater unrest. She had learned to heed those whispers in her profession. And so she remained alert, ready to respond if the storm truly arrived. Simone Hayes sat forward in her seat, fingertips lightly tapping the edge of the armrest as she scanned the cabin's soft lighting and muted hum of conversation. She had boarded at Los Angeles International Airport just before dawn, squeezing into rush-hour traffic on the way to catch her flight. Her mind had been full of case files, witness statements, and statistical charts outlining the recent surge in civil rights complaints. Now at 35,000 feet, her thoughts shifted gently toward home, toward family, toward the grandmother who had raised her after her parents passed away. Simone's chest tightened at the memory of last night's phone call, informing her that Evelyn Brooks had experienced another health setback. She unclenched her jaw and allowed herself a slow breath, reminding herself that her grandmother would want her to stay poised and thoughtful. Evelyn Brooks was the matriarch of the Hayes family. At 75, she moved with the grace of a dancer and the determination of an oak tree. Simone pictured her grandmother's neat silver hair and the lines tracing years of laughter and worry on her forehead. Evelyn had faced cancer treatments with fierce dignity, refusing to let illness define her. She had coached Simone through childhood bullies, guided her through heartbreaks, and cheered the loudest at her graduation from the FBI Academy. Simone owed every ounce of her resilience to the woman who never allowed fear to steal her courage. Now that the roles were reversing, Simone was determined to carry her grandmother's strength aboard this flight and beyond. She reached into her carry-on bag and pulled out a slim folder filled with letters and photographs. The top document was a letter from Evelyn, written in careful cursive only a grandmother could maintain, on shaky hands. Simone read the words in her mind, even without unfolding the paper. "My brave girl, keep shining your light, no matter how dark the skies become." She pressed the folder to her heart and laid it gently back on the tray table. There was a calm in that gesture, a reassurance that family love could travel with her through any storm. Her attention shifted to a small framed photo on her lap. It was a picture of her and Evelyn at a family reunion 2 summers ago, standing beneath a broad oak tree with arms wrapped around each other. Evelyn's smile was wide and steady. Simone felt a warmth spread through her chest. She was grateful for this moment of reflection because it reminded her why she fought for justice. It was not just about laws and policies. It was about protecting people's dignity. It was about preserving stories like her grandmother's. In her grandmother's voice, she heard the truth that justice was not merely a concept, but a living promise. Simone had always been methodical and observant. During academy training, she earned praise for her ability to recall minute details under pressure. During fieldwork, she earned respect for her unwavering integrity and compassion. Her colleagues sometimes found her intensity intimidating, but they knew she was driven by empathy. She remembered one case early in her career involving a school teacher wrongfully accused of misconduct. The teacher had sat across from Simone in a small interview room, hands shaking, eyes wide with fear. Simone had listened to every word and then arranged a thorough investigation that cleared the teacher's name. The gratitude in that teacher's eyes had felt like a victory more meaningful than any mission report could capture. Now en route to Washington, D.C., Simone's assignment was broader but equally personal. She was tasked with coordinating a multi-agency task force. Her mission was to identify patterns in hate crime reporting, to advise community groups, and to recommend policy adjustments where civil rights protections were falling short. The spike in cases along the eastern seaboard weighed heavily on her mind. She pictured the faces of victims who feared speaking out, families struggling for recognition, communities yearning for accountability. Simone knew she had to prepare thoroughly because the work ahead could affect countless lives. She opened her folder and scanned through her briefing notes but found herself distracted by the cabin's serene atmosphere. A flight attendant passed, offering refreshments. Simone politely declined and returned her gaze outward. Clouds passed like silent witnesses to her journey. Their soft shapes reminded her that beneath every smooth surface there could be hidden currents. Today she was traveling into unknown turbulence, both literal and figurative. Yet she refused to let fear determine her path. Instead, she summoned her grandmother's mantra. Stand tall, keep your heart open, trust in your truth. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of rest. The gentle hum of engines and distant murmur of passengers blended into a lullaby of motion. She visualized her grandmother's hands resting on her shoulders, grounding her. She visualized the oak tree and the way its roots held firm even when winds roared overhead. She visualized the faces of families waiting for justice, trusting her to carry their voices forward. In that instant, Simone felt center and ready. Her phone buzzed softly in her breast pocket. She slid it out and saw a message from her partner, Detective Marcus Lewis, who had stayed behind to handle local matters. His text was simple: "Thinking of you, stay safe, and keep me posted." Simone typed back, "Will do, thank you for holding down the fort." She tucked the phone away, reminded that she was not alone in her work. Strength came from community as well as inner resolve. As the plane glided above a sea of clouds, Simone reflected on the small moments that shaped her life. The sting of a racist teacher's comment in middle school that ignited her desire to challenge injustice. The feeling of being followed by security in a department store as a teenager, prompting her vow to fight discrimination in all its forms. The pride she felt donning her FBI badge for the first time, a symbol of her commitment to civil rights. These memories carried power. They reminded her that she belonged here, that her presence in first class was as valid as any other passenger's. She refused to let prejudice define what she deserved. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as a chime signaled that meal service was about to begin. Simone reached for her folder again and pulled out a small notebook filled with her own handwritten reflections. She made a note to herself: "Remember your grandmother's words. Find calm in the storm. Speak truth with compassion." She placed the notebook on her lap and let her hands rest. Her mind felt clear and determined. She was ready for whatever unfolded next. Just then, the cabin shuddered lightly, a reminder that the sky could shift on a whim. The seatbelt sign flickered on and the engine's hum deepened. Simone felt a thrill of anticipation. She straightened in her seat, ready to face the turbulence ahead. She trusted her training, her instincts, and above all her grandmother's wisdom to guide her. As the plane navigated through invisible currents, Simone Hayes remained steady, resolute in her purpose and grounded in her truth. Simone Hayes settled into her seat more fully, letting the gentle tilt of the cabin seat cradle her. The designer leather was soft beneath her fingertips, and the extra leg room created a sense of quiet luxury. But as she looked around the cabin, there was a subtle tension that contrasted with the plush surroundings. It was a look she had come to recognize over years in law enforcement, a polite veneer concealing deeper doubt. Across the aisle in seat 1B, Alicia Chen tapped thoughtfully on the screen of her slim laptop. Alicia was the founder and CEO of a fast-growing biotech firm based in Silicon Valley. She wore a tailored blazer and an easy smile. But Simone sensed Alicia's focus was on the glowing screen rather than social niceties. In seat 1C, retired Judge Marcus Wallace closed an ornate leather-bound volume and nodded appreciatively to the flight attendant as a small plate of appetizers arrived. Judge Wallace had presided over federal cases for decades, and on the rare occasions he flew, he did so in first class for comfort. He radiated a calm authority. Between those two well-known figures sat Simone, the lone person of color in this cabin. The seats had been assigned randomly, but the arrangement felt symbolic. Simone could almost hear the unspoken question in the eyes of some passengers. What is an FBI agent doing in first class? She reminded herself that she had paid for the ticket and that her credentials were real. Her presence here was valid. Still, she could not ignore the undercurrent of curiosity, the sideways glances that drifted over her shoulder only to flick away when caught. A flight attendant offered a warm greeting as he arrived at Simone's row. Mark Bennett was his name badge read. His smile was professional, but his eyes darted towards Simone's badge when she opened her leather folio to retrieve her boarding pass. She caught the flicker in his gaze. He asked if she would like a beverage. She requested water, and he moved on to the next passenger, pausing a moment over Alicia Chen before offering her a glass of champagne. Simone listened as he chatted briefly with Alicia about her recent fundraising round, laughing lightly at a comment Alicia made. When Mark continued down the aisle, he did not look back at Simone. In that moment, Simone felt the familiar tension of microaggression, small but unmistakable barriers erected around her. She exhaled slowly and returned her attention to the window. The sky beyond the glass was a pale azure, faint wisps of cloud drifting like ghosts. Simone allowed herself a brief moment of calm, remembering her grandmother's advice. Remember who you are, even when others question your worth. She pressed her fingertips to the cool window frame and let her mind drift to the work ahead. Evidence files, witness statements, policy memos. She would channel her energy there. Suddenly, the cabin lights dimmed slightly and a soft chime sounded. The flight attendant, Mark, reappeared, wheeling a cart stocked with menus and silver utensils. He handed a printed card to each passenger. Simone glanced at the menu and noted that the meal selections were exotic, yet refined seared tuna with citrus glaze, roasted root vegetables, artisanal cheeses. To her left, Alicia was already scanning her menu with a discerning eye. Simone admired the CEO's focus, but wondered if Alicia had noticed any of the subtle slights Simone had endured since boarding. She opened her own menu with deliberate calm. The flight attendant cleared his throat. Would she like to order now, or wait until the turbulence passed? Simone saw him pause once more. A flicker of hesitation, then say she could order now if she wished. She selected the seared tuna and asked for her water to be chilled. As Mark Bennett stowed the cart and returned to the galley, Simone made a mental note to include the service details in her debrief. Her gaze wandered again, this time toward the front of the cabin. Captain Robert Sinclair stood at the bulkhead talking quietly with co-pilot Eric Dawson. Sinclair's crisp uniform and polished shoes caught the cabin light. He exuded confidence. Eric looked slightly uneasy, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as he listened. Simone recognized that unspoken dynamic too. In the cockpit, authority often went unquestioned. But in the cabin, she had learned to read all the subtle cues. Simone's gaze shifted back to her seatmate Alicia. The CEO looked up from her menu and caught Simone's eye. For a moment, Alicia smiled kindly, as if to acknowledge a shared understanding of the journey they were on. Simone nodded politely. Alicia returned the gesture and turned her attention back to her options. Simone appreciated the small connection. It reminded her that not everyone here was indifferent or dismissive. A gentle hum of conversation drifted through the cabin as the flight attendant began taking orders. Simone noticed Alicia mentioned that she had recently launched a program to support women of color in STEM. Emily Hayes thought immediately of how meaningful such initiatives could be. Inside Simone's mind, she mentally assigned Alicia as a potential ally. She wondered if the CEO would be willing to share insights later. Once the flight had landed and tensions had eased, the retired Judge Marcus Wallace settled back in his seat, offering a small nod to Simone when their eyes met. His presence offered her a sense of respect. A seasoned jurist who understood the rule of law and the importance of fair treatment. Simone returned the nod more fully this time and offered a gentle smile. He gave her a slight nod in return before refocusing on his appetizer. Simone let the connection sink in. In this cabin, there were intersections of power and privilege. A tech CEO, a retired judge, an FBI agent, all sharing the same space for the next several hours. Yet she felt isolated in a way none of them did. She wondered if Alicia and Judge Wallace sensed the invisible lines that marked her as different. She hoped they did, and hoped that in time those lines would blur. The trolley rattled again as Mark Bennett re-emerged to collect menus and utensils. The cabin lights brightened back to normal, and the seatbelt sign was turned off. Simone felt a release in her shoulders. She stretched her legs gently and allowed herself to relax for a moment. She closed her eyes and replayed the morning's conversation with her grandmother. Evelyn had reminded her that discomfort could be a sign that change was needed. Simone let that idea settle in her mind like a seed waiting to grow. A warm glow filtered through the windows as the sun sailed higher in the sky. Simone took a slow sip of her water, savoring the cool liquid. She reflected on the meals she had shared with her grandmother roadside diners on trips to visit cousins, holiday dinners at the family home, the way Evelyn had always insisted they say grace before eating. Food had been a source of comfort and connection. Now, in the sky, Simone realized that nourishment extended beyond the plate. It came from empathy, from compassion offered freely, from shared experiences. She opened her eyes and looked at Alicia again. The CEO was engrossed in an email on her laptop. Simone admired her focus and clicked open her own briefcase to review her notes. She noted the names of community leaders she would meet in Washington, the dates of upcoming hearings, the outline of her opening speech to the task force. Work grounded her. It gave her a mission. Still, she remained alert for anything unusual. The soft patter of feet in the aisle alerted Simone to the arrival of a beverage service trolley. The attendant offered her another glass of water and asked if she would like anything else. Simone shook her head. The attendant paused, hesitated, then offered her a discreet smile before moving on. Simone returned the smile wholeheartedly. The small kindness felt like a bridge across the cabin's quiet divide. High overhead, the plane glided smoothly. Simone felt the reassuring stability in the way the wings held steady against the sky. Yet she knew that turbulence could strike at any moment. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a brief meditation. She imagined herself like the plane's wings, strong, balanced, able to remain level amidst shifting currents. Somewhere near the front of the cabin, she heard a faint click as the cockpit door opened. She felt her pulse quicken. She did not yet know how far prejudice could travel in this flight, but she was prepared. She had trained for this. She had lived through microaggressions and tested her resolve in countless investigations. She trusted in her training, in her grandmother's wisdom, and in the measure of dignity she carried with her. As the meal service began around her, Simone prepared for the next phase of her journey. The seamless luxury of first class was undercut by the uneasy glances and subtle hesitations she had observed. She knew that privilege often shielded people from the harsher currents of injustice. She had dedicated her life to bridging that gap. And whether this flight brought turbulence or calm, she would remain steadfast. The cabin lights settled into a soft glow as passengers finished their appetizers. Simone Hayes cradled her glass of chilled water, watching steam curl up from the tea service at the next row. A quiet lull had fallen over first class, broken only by the whir of the air conditioning and a distant murmur in economy. Everything felt calm on the surface. Yet beneath that calm lurked subtle tensions Simone knew all too well. She leaned back in her seat and reflected on the flight attendant's earlier behavior. Mark Bennett had paused for Alicia Chen and Judge Marcus Wallace without hesitation. But when he approached Simone, he had offered water only after an almost imperceptible delay. His politeness had been intact, but his eyes had flickered with a question Simone could not unsee. She understood those questions. They were born of unspoken assumptions about who belonged in first class and who did not. Simone closed her eyes and recalled the first time she encountered a similar moment as a teenager in a department store. She had been looking at a display of formal dresses when a security guard began following her. He kept his distance from her white friends but shadowed her every move. When she confronted him, he dismissed her concern as standard procedure. That moment had crystallized for Simone the reality of systemic bias. From then on, she had vowed to challenge injustice whenever she found it. She opened her eyes to see Mark Bennett returning with a cart of snacks. He offered selections of olives and artisanal nuts first to the CEO and judge, then hesitated again before turning to her. Simone simply nodded toward the plate she preferred and watched him place it on her tray. His movement was courteous, yet guarded, as if he were uncertain whether she deserved the same service. Simone took a small bite of the marinated olives and savored the tangy flavor. She reminded herself to document every detail later. She had learned that microaggressions were data points. Together, they formed a pattern that spoke louder than any single insult. Ignoring them allowed the pattern to continue. Speaking up invited conflict but also demanded accountability. A gentle hum of voices rose when a passenger in economy knocked over a cup in the aisle. Simone watched as a flight attendant hurried down to clean the spill. In that moment, everyone's gaze turned to the commotion. Simone wondered if any of them would notice if she asked for help. Probably not. She had seen the way people tended to prioritize those they saw as normal or expected. An FBI badge was official, but it was also unfamiliar in this context. She pressed her hand to her notebook, feeling its reassuring weight. Inside were pages of observations from her last assignment on discrimination in public housing. She had interviewed vulnerable families who lived in constant fear of being judged by the color of their skin. She had thanked them for their courage and promised to carry their stories forward. Now she carried those stories with her in this cabin. A soft chime indicated a change to the in-flight lighting. The cabin around her transformed into a twilight atmosphere, designed to ease people toward rest. Simone allowed herself a moment to study the effect. She appreciated the intentionality behind the design, even as she felt the irony of needing rest in a setting where she was on edge. Just then, Mark Bennett appeared at her side once more. He held a small dish of fruit slices. His smile was professional, but his posture was stiff. He placed the dish on her tray and said, "Would you like anything else, Miss Hayes?" She gave a polite, "No, thank you." Then he nodded and moved on without making eye contact. Simone exhaled slowly. She reminded herself that a simple no thank you was a way to assert her right to equal service without drawing attention to the slight. She took a strawberry slice and let its sweetness calm her nerves. A subtle shift in cabin pressure made the overhead bins click softly. In the hush that followed, Simone sensed a change. She glanced across the aisle where Alicia Chen raised her glass in a silent toast. Simone returned the gesture. This unspoken solidarity warmed her more than any hospitality could. She closed her notebook and retrieved her phone. She scrolled to a draft text she had begun composing for her grandmother. Evelyn Brooks, it read. "The flight is calm, but the air is thick with small storms." She hesitated before sending it. "Remember who you are." She typed beneath. Then she deleted the message and put the phone away. She would not burden her grandmother with her work stress, but the act of drafting the note had reminded her that she was not alone. Simone leaned forward and uncapped her pen. She began jotting notes. A slight hesitation in service. Timing of every trolley stop. The way Mark's smile never quite reached his eyes. the length of time he lingered at other seats versus hers, a catalog of microaggressions, each one a thread in a tapestry of bias. As she wrote, she replayed earlier moments from childhood teachers who remarked in surprise on her intelligence, classmates who touched her hair without asking, security guards who followed her in stores. Each memory was another data point, another reason to persevere. A gentle murmur rose when the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Calm professional, I am Captain Robert Sinclair. We are experiencing some minor turbulence and ask that you please keep your seatbelts fastened until the sign is turned off." Simone listened to his tone carefully. There was authority in his words, but also an undercurrent of dismissal. As if any inconvenience was an annoyance to him personally, Simone pressed her pen to the page and wrote Captain Sinclair underlined. Next to it, she noted microaggression, level 2, tone, condescending. She wanted to capture everything objectively. Even when her heart raced, she relied on facts. The seatbelt sign dinged on and the cabin lights brightened once more. Flight attendants returned to their stations, ready to assist. This time, Mark Bennett moved directly toward Alicia and Judge Wallace first. Then he turned to Simone without hesitation, offering assistance with a small bag of crackers. Simone nodded and offered quiet thanks. The crackers were satisfying and simple. She ate them deliberately, feeling the crunch between her teeth. Each bite reminded her of the resilience required to navigate a world that often judged her before she spoke. She closed her eyes briefly and allowed the flavor to ground her. Suddenly, the turbulence intensified. A low rumble passed through the cabin as the plane dipped, then rose again. Simone felt the familiar spike of adrenaline. She gripped the armrests and inhaled deeply. She was trained for this kind of moment, to remain calm, to assess the situation, to act decisively if needed. Alicia Chen let out a small gasp as the plate of appetizers rattled on her tray. Judge Wallace adjusted his seatbelt with practiced ease. Meanwhile, Simone sensed the turbulence as an opportunity. She tapped her pen twice and wrote possible opening, strong emotions, heightened awareness. The turbulence subsided after a few seconds, leaving only a gentle sway. Simone exhaled. She closed her notebook and tucked it away. She would review her notes later when she had time. But now she turned her focus to the cabin around her. She observed facial expressions, the way people steadied their belongings, the way they reached for their seatbelts. She watched the flight attendants offer water and reassurance. Some passengers smiled. Gratefully, others looked away uncertainly. Simone realized how critical small gestures could be in moments of fear. She had witnessed how compassion broke down barriers, how courtesy created connection. A hush fell again when the overhead bins clicked shut and the seatbelt sign dinged off. She leaned back and allowed herself a moment of reflection. The sky outside was a brilliant canvas of cloud and light. It was beautiful and indifferent, simultaneously vast and confining. She thought of her grandmother's words, "Be the calm in the storm." Those words had carried her through Quantico, through her first case. Through every moment, someone told her she did not belong. Here in first class, those words guided her once again. Simone placed her hand over her heart and let her fingers brush the edge of her FBI badge beneath her blouse. It was a symbol of authority and responsibility. But more than that, it was a reminder of her mission: to protect dignity, to challenge injustice, to give voice to those silenced by prejudice. A flight attendant passed offering a final round of water. Simone accepted and offered a genuine smile. Mark Bennett returned it, this time without hesitation. Simplicity and sincerity had bridged the divide. With her glass raised, Simone thought of the families she was fighting for, the mothers who feared their children being followed in stores, the students who were dismissed as tokens, the workers who endured slights every day. She would carry their stories forward, beyond this flight, beyond every barrier. The cabin hummed with quiet calm once more, and Simone sat ready for whatever unfolded next. She was vigilant and poised, her commitment unwavering. She would not let these microaggressions go unspoken, but she would choose her moment. Above her, the plane flew steadily through the sky, a vessel of possibility and challenge. Simone Hayes remained resolute in her purpose and unshaken in her truth. Simone Hayes felt the cabin shift as Captain Robert Sinclair emerged from the cockpit door, his uniform impeccable and his posture commanding attention. Every eye in first class followed him as he paused at the bulkhead, offering a calm nod to co-pilot Eric Dawson before stepping into the cabin with deliberate confidence. The hum of conversation softened as passengers sensed his presence. He moved with the assurance of someone accustomed to authority, his polished shoes clicking against the aisle carpet. From her seat, Simone observed him closely. Captain Sinclair was in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair cropped in a neat military style. His 4 gold stripes gleamed on his sleeves, symbols of rank and experience. Yet beneath the uniform, she detected an undercurrent of impatience, a readiness to assert control. She straightened in her seat, meeting his gaze as he approached. She was prepared to stand her ground, to be measured and firm. He greeted Alicia Chen first, offering a warm handshake and genuine interest in her biotech ventures. They spoke briefly about her recent funding success, Sinclair listening attentively as she described her company's plans to develop life-saving therapies. Simone noted the ease of their interaction, the friendly tone. Then Sinclair moved on to Judge Marcus Wallace, acknowledging the judge's distinguished career with respectful deference. Judge Wallace nodded and offered a polite remark before returning to his meal. By the time Captain Sinclair reached Simone's row, he had shifted purposefully, his expression subtly cooler. He extended his hand with a practiced smile. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes. Welcome aboard." He spoke her name as if confirming a surprise, as if her presence in first class required validation. Simone offered her hand in return. "Thank you. Good morning, Captain Sinclair." She kept her tone even, her posture calm yet unyielding. He stepped closer, the air between them charged with a silent test of wills. "I see you are an FBI agent." She held up her badge unobtrusively. "It says as much under your name," Simone replied. She studied his eyes for a flicker of recognition or respect. He nodded, almost curtly. "Indeed, it is not often we have federal agents in first class." He paused as if to gauge her reaction, then added, "I hope you find the flight comfortable. We strive for excellence." Simone offered a measured smile. "So far, so good. Thank you." She returned her gaze to the window. As he turned away, she sensed the murmur of whispered glances from nearby passengers. She let her spine remain straight and her breathing steady. She would not let the slight rattle her. Captain Sinclair moved on to greet economy passengers traveling in premium comfort, but never one glanced back at Simone. Simone held her expression neutral. She had learned early in her career that maintaining composure was a form of strength. She closed her eyes briefly and visualized her grandmother Evelyn Brooks offering reassurance from afar. "Stand tall," she whispered in her mind. A moment later, co-pilot Eric Dawson approached. He was younger than Sinclair, in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and a hint of nerves. He offered Simone a warm smile. "Hello, Ms. Hayes. I hope you are enjoying your flight." He sounded sincere and straightforward. Simone nodded. "Thank you. Yes. It has been smooth so far. I imagine you have everything under control." He chuckled softly and nodded. "The captain and I managed the flight carefully, but the cabin is in good hands," Dawson said. He straightened and glanced toward the front, then back to her. "Are you a frequent flyer?" Simone shook her head. "Not usually, but work takes me around the country quite a bit." She glanced at his wings on his shirt. "Good to speak with you." He offered a respectful nod, then moved on. Simone turned back to the cabin. The dynamic she witnessed was clear. Sinclair held authority in the cockpit and in the cabin. Eric Dawson served as his ally, steady and respectful. The contrast between their interactions with passengers revealed unspoken hierarchies. Simone made a note in her mind to document these patterns. Authority could influence treatment in subtle but significant ways. As the meal service resumed, Serena noticed Mark Bennett moving down the aisle with the trolley. Earlier, microaggressions repeated themselves. First, he served Alicia Chen and Judge Wallace with attentive courtesy, then hesitated by Simone's seat. She asked for another glass of water, and he complied. His expression neutral, but his pace slower. Simone let him finish before returning her attention to the unfolding scene. Suddenly, Captain Sinclair returned. He paused at the doorway of the galley and called out, "Everyone, please remain seated as we encounter pockets of turbulence up ahead." The seatbelt sign flickered on and the cabin hummed with the gentle shake of the plane. Simone felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She inhaled deeply. The warning was routine, yet his tone carried a sharpness as if any inconvenience during his flight was an affront. Simone tightened her seatbelt and reached for her notebook. Her hand moved as though guided by habit, noting turbulence, level moderate microaggression, in tone slight condescension. She watched Sinclair's reflection in the polished bulkhead and tapped her pen. His voice remained calm, but his posture in the reflection spoke entitlement. A ripple of unsteady motion slid through the cabin. A champagne flute rattled gently on a nearby tray table. Alicia Chen managed a polite laugh as her appetizer flew forward. Judge Wallace adjusted his seatbelt with a practiced gesture. Simone placed her water on the tray and braced herself, heart steadying and mind clear. She had faced turbulence in far more volatile circumstances and prevailed. When the turbulence subsided, Sinclair re-entered the cabin, moving swiftly this time to ensure protocols were followed. He checked on passengers orally. "Hello, Ms. Chen. How are you doing?" Ms. Chen responded that she was fine, and he offered a reassuring nod. He moved on and did not pause for Simone. Simone watched him walk away and felt the familiar hum of exclusion. She closed her eyes momentarily and let the memory of her grandmother's steady embrace wash over her. "Stand your ground," she heard once more. Soon after the meal ended, Captain Sinclair returned one final time to first class. He offered a brief apology for the disturbance. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the rough air ahead. We appreciate your understanding." Simone sat perfectly still but met his gaze as he spoke. Her calm resolve spoke volumes. He gave a curt nod and turned away. After he left, Alicia Chen leaned toward Simone and said, "That was quite professional of him." She offered a supportive smile. Simone replied, "Thank you, I appreciate that." She paused and then asked, "Would you be willing to share your name and contact information in case I need your support later?" Alicia nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely, I will text you once we disembark." Simone felt gratitude for the gesture. Alliances formed quietly but profoundly in moments of shared experience. She made a mental note to follow up later with Alicia's staff contact. Judge Wallace caught Simone's eye next. He offered a discreet nod and a few whispered words. "If you need anything, do let me know," Simone replied. "Thank you, Judge Wallace." Those words felt genuine as they passed between them. Simone pocketed her notebook and allowed herself to relax. The cabin lights brightened and the seatbelt sign clicked off. The flight attendant resumed service with renewed efficiency, this time treating Simone without hesitation. Small acts of respect restored some equilibrium. Simone accepted a refill of her water and offered a sincere thank you. The attendant, Mark Bennett, gave her a warm smile and a nod before moving on. Simone leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment's meditation. She reflected on the sequence of interactions. Authority asserted by Sinclair. Support shown by Dawson, Chen, and Wallace. Microaggressions from Bennett. Patterns emerged that mirrored broader structures of power and bias. She felt both the weight of exclusion and the comfort of solidarity. Her grandmother's wisdom had guided her through every ripple of discomfort. The engines hummed a steady lullaby as the plane glided through a smooth layer of cloud cover. Simone placed her hand over her heart and whispered a quiet affirmation. I stand for justice, even when the currents shift. She opened her eyes and gazed at the sky outside, a vast expanse of possibility and challenge. She felt grounded in her purpose, unwavering in her commitment. Above her, Captain Sinclair continued to command his vessel with precision. Below him, Simone Hayes navigated the cabin's complex currents with equal skill. She prepared herself for whatever turbulence lay ahead, knowing that her truth and her resolve would guide her safely through the skies. Clouds drifted past the window, sunlight glinting off their cotton fluff tops. Simone Hayes sat upright in her first-class seat, eyes calm but alert. She had just finished her notes on the captain's interactions when a soft rattling of service carts gave way to a sudden lurch. The seatbelt sign chimed on. A ripple of unease passed through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances as the plane dipped and rose again. Simone placed her water back on the tray and gripped the armrests. She had felt turbulence before, but never had it come with such an undercurrent of tension. Her mind sharpened. She surveyed the cabin. Passengers in economy grabbed armrests and muttered. In first class, Alicia Chen's gaze flicked toward the cockpit bulkhead, her expression taut. Judge Marcus Wallace steeled himself with a slow breath. Flight attendant Mark Bennett steadied the trolley, offering calm reassurance to nervous travelers. Then the cabin door swung open. Captain Robert Sinclair emerged with an urgency that stole the last of the morning's courtesy. He strode down the aisle, face set in tight lines. He stopped beside Simone's row, briefly resting a hand on the bulkhead for support. His eyes met hers, and in that instant she recognized a flicker of something beneath his professional mask: resentment, or perhaps panic. Simone met his gaze evenly. She reminded herself that every action here would carry weight. She uncrossed her legs and braced herself for what would come. Sinclair leaned closer, lowering his voice. We need everyone to stay in their seats until this front passes. He sounded clipped, his tone less cordial than before. Simone nodded silently. He turned and continued toward the rear. His departure left a charged silence. Simone exhaled slowly and allowed her nerves to settle. Then she noticed him pause again, as if torn between the cockpit and the cabin. He looked back at her, hesitated, and walked on. A soft clink of metal signaled that he had returned to the cockpit. Just as the engines roared a warning rumble, the plane shuddered violently. The lights flickered. Passengers cried out. A bottle rolled off a side table and shattered. Simone's training took over. She gripped the seat arms and inhaled deeply. She felt the plane dip again, bowing as if to acknowledge a sudden drop in air pressure. The seatbelt sign glowed insistently. Moments later, the turbulence eased. The engines hummed with renewed steadiness. The seatbelt sign dinged off and the cabin lights brightened. Passengers exhaled collectively. Simone unclasped her hands and placed them on her lap. She glanced at those around her. Alicia Chen rubbed her temples, eyes closed to steady the rush of adrenaline. Judge Wallace retrieved his fallen reading glasses and offered a reassuring nod to the nearby flight attendant. Then the cockpit door opened again. Captain Sinclair stepped out, his crisp uniform creased at the shoulders, hair slightly disheveled. He advanced into the cabin with a sense of determined purpose. Simone watched him as he navigated the aisle, passing rows of passengers whose expressions ranged from relief to residual fear. When he reached Simone's row, his gaze hardened. He met her eyes squarely. "Water drank water, requested that was enough," he said tersely, his words clipped and defensive. Simone registered his clipped tone as a challenge. She maintained her composed posture perfectly. She held his gaze for a beat. Then she slid her hand to her lap and rested it on her FBI badge beneath her blouse. Captain Sinclair's eyes flicked downward at the badge, and a thin line formed at the corner of his mouth. He straightened and sighed sharply. He had expected deference, but he found firmness instead. He stepped back, mouth working as if to say more. Instead, he uttered, "Fine, please. Sit tight for a few more minutes and return to the cockpit without another word." The abrupt departure left a charged hush. Simone exhaled, the tension easing from her shoulders. She glanced at Alicia and Judge Wallace. Alicia gave her a small, encouraging nod. Judge Wallace gave a respectful nod. Simone allowed herself a brief smile of gratitude before turning her attention back to the cabin. Just then, Mark Bennett reappeared. He moved to Simone's seat, offering water with a steady hand. He met her eyes, and this time there was no hesitation, only genuine concern. "Would you like anything else?" he asked quietly. She shook her head but allowed him a moment of kindness before he wheeled his trolley on. Small acts of respect felt significant now. Simone took a drink and let the cool water soothe her throat. She placed the glass carefully on the tray table. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. The screen displayed the note she had begun crafting. "Turbulence is calm compared to prejudice." She deleted the draft. There would be time later for messages. Right now, she needed to focus on gathering evidence. She produced her notebook once more and scribbled notes under the heading "Moment of Impact." She recorded the sequence exactly. Turbulence level moderate with unusual onshores. Captain's request terse and clipped. Captain spat. She paused and closed the notebook. Spat. Just the single word carried weight. She held it in her mind. Her heart pounded, but her voice would remain steady. She pressed a button on the side of her phone. The recording app opened. She tapped record and reached for the aired vent above to test the mic. The slight hiss confirmed the app was active. Then she spoke softly. "Captain Sinclair assaulted me with saliva at 14:45 local time on flight AA2045. Microaggression history and witness statements to follow." She ended the recording and stowed her phone. This documentation would prove vital. She ran her fingertips over her cheek, feeling the faint dampness that remained. The humiliation of being spat upon was searing. The sting of someone else's saliva had left a physical reminder of prejudice made manifest. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Keep your dignity, even when they try to steal it." Simone inhaled slowly and released a steady exhale. She would not be defined by this moment. She would use it. She turned to Alicia and spoke quietly. "I would appreciate your testimony." She offered a steady smile and responded, "Certainly, I saw everything you did well. You handled that with calm authority." "Thank you," she nodded. Next she turned to Judge Wallace. "Your Honor, if I may ask for your assistance in documenting this." He gave a solemn nod of support. "Of course, Agent Hayes, I am at your disposal." Simone felt bolstered by their solidarity. She rose to gather witness contact information. Judge Wallace pulled out a small card with his name and contact. Alicia produced her own notepad. Passengers nearby edged closer as recordings on phones began to illuminate screens. Word spread quickly among the cabin. Phones recorded footage of the incident. Voices whispered, "You're making a record. You have him now. You're going to be okay." The supportive murmurs bolstered Simone's resolve. High above the earth, the plane settled into smoother air. The seatbelt sign clicked off. The cabin lights dimmed slightly to invite relaxation. But Simone remained alert. She crossed her arms and sat back, allowing the moment to settle. She would file her formal report when they landed. She had evidence, witnesses, and her own badge. The plane glided steadily again through the sky. Simone Hayes had just endured one of the most brazen acts of racial hostility possible at 35,000 feet, yet she emerged unbowed. Her dignity remained intact. She would see this through. She would confront prejudice not just in the cabin, but beyond it. Her grandmother's strength guided her still. No turbulence of the air, no assault of disrespect, could deter her purpose. Silence settled over the cabin like a soft blanket after the storm. Simone Hayes sat upright, pulse still racing from the captain's unthinkable act. Around her, first-class passengers exchanged quiet murmurs. Some faces reflected shock, others sympathy. The hum of the engines felt distant, as if the world beyond the cabin ceased to exist for a moment. Simone pressed her fingertips to her cheek, feeling the faint trace of moisture and the lingering sting of humiliation. But beneath that sting burned a fierce determination. Alicia Chen leaned toward Simone and whispered, "Are you all right?" Your voice was steady, simple, but full of concern. Simone gave a quick nod. "I will be. Thank you for your support." She focused on Alicia's steady gaze and drew strength from her ally's solidarity. The CEO had spoken up without hesitation, offering her testimony, and that moment had shifted the balance. Simone felt less alone. Judge Marcus Wallace cleared his throat softly and added, "If there is anything I can do to assist, please let me know." His tone was respectful and genuine. Simone offered him a grateful smile. "Thank you, Judge. Your support means a great deal." She noted the judge's calm authority would lend credibility when she documented this incident. Flight attendant Mark Bennett returned to Simone's row. His cart left forgotten in the aisle. He knelt beside her seat and said in a low voice, "I am so sorry about what happened. Would you like some medical attention, or perhaps a wet towel to help with that mask of yours?" Simone met his eyes and saw true regret. There was no defensiveness this time, only the sincere apology of someone who understood the gravity of what had occurred. "I'm fine. Thank you, Mark." She took a deep breath and felt relief wash over her. "You can bring me a towel in a moment, if you don't mind." He nodded and hurried to the galley. Simone closed her eyes and allowed her mind to wander back to the moment when Captain Robert Sinclair spat in her face. She had felt shock first, then that rush of adrenal clarity. In her training, she learned that victims of assault often experienced a fleeting window where adrenaline sharpened their senses and empowered them to act decisively. Simone had used that window to reach for her FBI credentials, gather witness names, and initiate the recording that would become critical evidence. Now her thoughts surfaced the scene in vivid detail. The tap of Sinclair's polished shoe on the aisle carpet, the clang of the seatbelt sign as it flickered on the muffled gasps from passengers. She opened her notebook and scribbled a quick note. Moment of impact. Exact position 95% down aisle. 2 seconds after turbulence warning. Then she paused and slipped the notebook back into her bag. It was enough for now. She would organize the details later when adrenaline calmed and focus sharpened, but she needed to tend to the immediate aftermath. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the co-pilot Eric Dawson re-entered the cabin. He moved with purposeful calm and approached Simone's seat. "Mr. Hayes," Erica said softly, "I wanted to check on you personally. After everything, is there anything you need?" He offered a warm smile that conveyed genuine concern. Simone shook her head. "I'm okay, thank you, Eric." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "If you require anything else, please let me know." He gave her a reassuring nod and returned to the galley area. Simone inclined her head toward the rear of the cabin, where the flight attendant at the beverage cart offered water to economy passengers. The flow of service had resumed, but the mood remained solemn. Stranger eyes met Simone's, and in those moments she saw glimmers of admiration, as though passengers recognized the courage it took to stand up at 35,000 feet. She reached for her phone and opened the recording she had saved. The file was labeled Incident AA1045. Timestamp 1445. She listened to the first few seconds where her calm voice stated, "Captain Sinclair assaulted me with saliva." Then she stopped the playback and set the phone aside. The recording was clear evidence, but it also served as a tacit promise to herself. She would see this through Alicia Chen, returned with a soft towel folded neatly on a silver tray. She handed it to Simone. "You should wipe your face again. This was the least we could do for you." Simone accepted it gratefully and dabbed gently at her cheek. The cool fabric soothed the lingering warmth. "Thank you, Alicia. Your kindness means more than you know." She forced a small smile, but felt the relief of human compassion. As she laid the towel aside, Simone noticed Captain Sinclair's reflection in the bulkhead window behind Alicia's empty seat. He stood, with arms crossed, looking into the cabin, perhaps watching the passenger's reaction. Simone met his gaze for a split second, then turned her head away. She would not give him the power of her attention. Her focus remained on gathering witness information and documenting every detail. She opened her bag and pulled out her small stack of business cards bearing her FBI contact information. She stood and addressed those seated nearby. "I know many of you witnessed what happened. Would you be willing to share your statements with me?" She pointed to Alicia and Judge Wallace first, then to a young businessman in 1D who had filmed with his phone. He nodded and raised his hand wholeheartedly. "I got it on video." I smiled and said, "Thank you, Samuel. Your cooperation will be invaluable." He provided his email address carefully, and Simone slipped the card into his hand. One by one, passengers came forward. A flight attendant from economy relayed her observations. A mother in row 2 offered to provide a written account. Simone thanked each person sincerely. Among the witnesses was a journalist traveling incognito who promised the story would not be buried. Simone felt gratitude swelling in her chest, but tempered it with professional composure. This was not a moment for ego, but for justice. The cabin settled into a new rhythm. The meal trays were cleared, headphones appeared, in-flight entertainment resumed. But Simone sensed a shift. The unity in the cabin created an invisible shield around her. She was no longer a solitary figure experiencing injustice, but the center of a quiet movement affirming dignity. She could feel the collective energy of empathy and resolve. She glanced at the flight attendant, Mark Bennett, who met her eyes with a nod of respect. His earlier hesitation had transformed into earnest support. That change felt significant. It spoke of the potential for individual growth that often remained hidden in the routines of service. Simone silently acknowledged that breakthrough. In that gesture of respect, she recognized the power of accountability. Simone's gaze drifted to the front where the cockpit door stood closed. She took a steadying breath and recalled her grandmother Evelyn's words. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand when fear presses hardest. She felt fear in her chest, like a fluttering bird, but also felt the resolute flame of purpose fed by that fear. She would not falter. A soft ding from the intercom interrupted her thoughts, and co-pilot Eric Dawson's voice filled the cabin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Captain Sinclair and myself. I want to apologize for the events that occurred earlier. We are committed to your safety and dignity and will continue to do everything possible to make your flight comfortable. Simone listened to the apology with careful attention. It was a measured statement, but missing direct acknowledgement of the assault. Nonetheless, the sentiment of regret offered by the cockpit reinforced that the airline recognized the severity of the incident. She tapped her notebook and wrote Captain's apology tone. Formal acknowledgement of incident lacking direct responsibility. She would include that nuance in her formal report. Precision in language mattered here as much as proof of action. Simone closed her notebook and dusted off her hands. She sat back and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The path forward would involve paperwork investigations, media scrutiny, and likely a courtroom. She steeled herself to face all of that. For now, she remained present in this cabin, surrounded by passengers who had witnessed wrongdoing and chosen solidarity over silence. Beside her, Alicia Chen offered a small nod and whispered, "You did the right thing." Simone met her gaze and answered softly, "I did what I had to do." She felt the truth of those words in her bones. The flight would continue to Washington, D.C., but the journey had already changed. She had harnessed moments of terror and turned them into affirmation of justice. Above them, the plane climbed into smoother air. The seatbelt sign chimed off. A steady hum resumed as passengers settled into the rest of the flight. Simone took a final sip of water and placed her glass aside. She closed her eyes briefly, envisioning her grandmother's reassuring smile. A new calm had taken hold after the outburst. The plane and its passengers had weathered the storm together and emerged stronger, for as Simone Hayes opened her eyes and felt ready, the cabin was transformed into a space of shared integrity and collective resolve. She would carry this experience forward to Washington, D.C., to the FBI briefing room, to the halls of justice. Her grandmother's light would guide her steps. This calm after the outburst was not an end, but the beginning of a journey toward accountability and reform. The cabin returned to its gentle hum, punctuated by the soft clink of glassware and the occasional call for assistance. Simone Hayes leaned back in her seat, draping an arm over the armrest as she surveyed the aftermath of the captain's assault. Around her, first-class passengers settled into a new, quieter rhythm. Some watched her with sympathetic eyes. Others closed their laptops, phones in hand, ready to cooperate. The plane glided through a layer of stratus clouds, and the world outside the window remained unchanged, oblivious to the storm of prejudice that had surfaced inside. Simone reached into her bag and retrieved her phone. She tapped the recording app and reviewed the file she had created. The audio began with her calm voice, identifying the time 14:45 local and stating clearly that Captain Robert Sinclair had assaulted her with saliva. She listened to the clip again, then paused it. The clarity of her voice, the ambient engine roar behind it, his retreating footsteps, all were preserved. She tapped save and then pressed send, forwarding the file to her secure work email with a concise subject line: Flight AA-2045 Incident Recording. Now it would be part of the permanent record. Her heart beat steadily, but fatigue tugged at her eyelids. She thought of her grandmother Evelyn, lying in a hospital bed, waiting for updates, unaware of the magnitude of what Simone faced 3 miles overhead. Simone closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, picturing Evelyn's gentle smile. The memory helped center her, reminding her why she fought so relentlessly for justice. She imagined Evelyn's voice whispering in her ear, "Keep your heart steady and your purpose clear." Simone reopened her eyes and retrieved her notebook once more. She flipped to the section labeled Pre-Flight Observations and added a new heading, Evidence Collection. Under this, she wrote bullet points, recording time-stamped and emailed, witness contact details collected, video footage on passenger phones, note to request CCTV from cabin cameras upon landing. She paused after writing CCTV. The airline's internal cameras would be critical. She had to ensure the footage was preserved and secured before any tampering could occur. She glanced at Alicia Chen, who was typing quickly on her laptop, no doubt transcribing the incident into an email for corporate counsel, or perhaps drafting her statement. Simone appreciated the CEO's decisiveness. She had invited Alicia to share anything she had captured on video or voice recording. Simone tapped Alicia lightly on the shoulder and smiled. "Thank you again for offering to send your footage. I'll coordinate with your team on the best way to receive it." Alicia nodded and said softly, "I'll have my assistant reach out to you as soon as we land. You have my word." Simone closed her notebook and leaned back. The plane had entered smoother air, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. A soft glow returned to the cabin. The flight attendant Mark Bennett approached with a discreet tray of fruit and nuts. He placed it on her tray and said, "No charge for this. If you need anything else, please let me know." The sincerity in his tone felt genuine. Simone gave him a small smile and nodded. "Thank you, Mark. Your professionalism is appreciated." Mark acknowledged her with a respectful nod and moved on. Simone allowed herself a small moment of relief. She had secured recordings, witness contacts, and support from key passengers. Yet beneath her professional calm lay a swirl of inner conflict. She had always prided herself on impartial analysis, but now she wrestled with choices she would face after landing. Would she pursue a swift resolution through a civil settlement, or insist on full criminal charges and a public trial? The stakes felt intensely personal and profoundly systemic. She closed her eyes and replayed the captain's spat in slow motion in her mind. The bullet of saliva had cut through her composure instantly. Then the initial shock had given way to resolve as she reached for her badge and initiated her documentation. That split-second decision would define the path forward. She asked herself why she had reacted so swiftly and what that reaction meant in the broader context of civil rights enforcement. She felt gratitude that her badge granted her authority in that moment. She also felt the weight of responsibility. She could not let this act of violence be swept under the rug as another bad day for a pilot under stress. Her eyes opened and she focused on her notebook again. She scribbled a new entry in her conflict. Under that, she wrote settlement versus criminal prosecution, family needs versus systemic accountability, public scrutiny versus personal privacy. She drew a circle around settlement versus criminal prosecution and stared at it. A settlement would expedite compensation for her grandmother's medical bills and spare Evelyn the anguish of media attention. But a settlement, even a large one, risked allowing Captain Sinclair to avoid criminal consequences. It risked letting the system protect its own rather than uphold civil rights. She tapped her pen against her desk and considered her grandmother's advice. Justice is more than an outcome. It is a process that must be seen to be believed. She drew a faint line connecting that motto to her inner conflict. She reminded herself that her choice would send a message to victims of discrimination everywhere. If she chose the settlement, would others see civil rights law as negotiable? If she chose prosecution, would she be prepared for the ordeal of trial, the threats, the strain on her family? Simone pressed her palm to her chest, feeling her heart beat slow as she practiced her breathing techniques. Inhale for 5 counts. Exhale for 7. She visualized inhaling calm and exhaling doubt. Her mind drifted to the family she would meet next week in Washington. Mothers who had lost children to bias-fueled violence. Students whose college applications were dismissed. Employees forced to endure workplace harassment. Their stories demanded accountability. She could not compromise the principle of justice. She tapped her pen twice and added another bullet point consult with Assistant Director Carter on policy implications. Evelyn Brooks had believed in principle above expedience, and Carter, as the FBI's second-in-command, would provide guidance on the Bureau's priorities. Sophie listened to her own heartbeat and sensed a rising clarity. She knew she would face pressure from the airline's legal team to choose the settlement. She knew she might face pressure from her own agency to avoid a politically charged trial. Yet she also knew she had the authority to decide. Simone set her notebook aside and opened her secure government tablet. She drafted a brief memo to Assistant Director Evelyn Carter, Flight AA-21045 incident. Assault on federal officer captured on multiple recordings. Witness testimonies collected. Request guidance on prosecution versus civil resolution. Please advise. She hit send. Now the DOJ leadership would weigh in. She felt both relief and apprehension. The decision would soon shift from her hands to a broader institutional judgment, but her documentation would be the foundation. Her mind drifted again to the personal dimension, Evelyn Brooks' treatment schedule, the rent on her childhood home, the deferred repairs she had postponed while pursuing a federal career, the dream of someday opening a center for community mediation in her grandmother's name. A settlement could fund that initiative, but a criminal conviction could catalyze broader reform in airline policies and civil rights enforcement. She weighed the tangible against the intangible. Both paths had merit. Both served justice in different ways. A gentle ding from her tablet signaled that Carter's office had acknowledged receipt of her memo. The reply read, "Thank you, Agent Hayes. I will review with the director and respond shortly. Stand by." It was a concise affirmation. Simone closed the tablet and exhaled. The weight on her shoulders felt heavy but purposeful. She was doing her job. She reopened her notebook and noted the final key step: preserve airline black box data and communication logs. Ensure FAA investigation coordination. She underlined that note in red ink. Then she closed the notebook and placed it gently in her lap. She folded her hands and closed her eyes for a moment of silent resolve. She had assembled evidence, secured support, and sought institutional guidance. Now she would await the next chapter. Outside the window, the plane drifted above a layer of stratocumulus clouds. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in pastel strokes of pink and gold. The scene held a quiet beauty, a reminder that the world continued beyond the cabin's drama. Simone drew a final breath and allowed herself gratitude for that reminder. Tomorrow would bring briefings, legal debates, and policy discussions. But for now she sat grounded in calm purpose, guided by evidence and fortified by inner clarity. She opened her eyes and gazed at the passengers around her. Some were reading, some napped, others watched the screen overhead. The cabin felt united in purpose and named in shared expectation. A collective commitment to safety and dignity had crystallized in those moments after the outburst and during the evidence gathering. Simone felt honored to lead that collective witness. With a steady hand, she reached for her half-full glass of water, lifted it in a silent toast to everyone who had spoken up, and took a thoughtful sip. Then she tucked the glass into its holder and settled in, ready for whatever came next. The plane would continue toward Washington, D.C., and so would she, armed with truth, evidence, and an unwavering sense of justice. The wheels of Flight AA-21045 touched down on the runway with a firm but steady thud. Simone Hayes felt the vibration of the landing through her seat and released a long breath she had been holding. Around her, first-class passengers straightened, gentle smiles replacing the solemn looks of earlier. The cabin lights brightened and the seatbelt sign dinged off. It was over, she thought, at least the airborne chapter of it. Through the window, she could see a line of black SUVs with government plates queued on the tarmac. A cluster of suited agents and airline representatives stood beside a mobile staircase. Simone gathered her belongings thoughtfully. She had documented every detail. She had preserved audio and witness statements. She had secured her grandmother's strength in sobriety and in spirit. Now the focus would shift from sky to ground. As the plane slowed to a taxi speed, co-pilot Eric Dawson's calm voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington, D.C. Thank you for flying with us today. We appreciate your patience and understanding." He paused respectfully before adding, "If you experienced anything that requires follow-up, you may contact Captain Sinclair's office or reach out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation office on this ground level." Simone listened as passengers murmured gratitude and gathered their things. The cabin door opened and the mobile staircase rolled into place. Simone rose and slipped off her jacket. She checked her reflection in the window and smoothed her blouse. She fastened the strap on her satchel and tucked her badge inside rather than wear it openly. It was still part of her identity, but she wanted to transition from airborne agent to grounded investigator. She stood as passengers in front of her unbuckled seatbelts and filed toward the exit. At the bottom of the stairs, Assistant Director Evelyn Carter stood poised with a small team of agents. Evelyn's silver hair and dignified presence radiated quiet strength. Simone descended and locked eyes with her mentor. Carter gave a brief nod and offered her arm. In the soft morning light, they walked together toward the SUVs. Evelyn greeted Simone with a low voice. "Welcome back. Are you all right?" Simone nodded. "I am. Thank you for coming. Family means everything to me." Evelyn's expression was tender before it shifted to business. "We have a medical team ready at the terminal for you to get checked as you requested, and we have an initial meeting with our legal counsel and airline leadership in 30 minutes. "That sounds good," Simone replied. Her mind raced through the next steps. Debrief with Carter, then meet with airline executives, then decide on criminal or civil action. She kept her voice even. Outside the terminal doors, the press swarm made itself known. Camera lights popped like fireflies. Microphones extended toward her. Reporters shouted questions. Simone moved swiftly alongside Carter past the throng. A brief statement floated behind her from a reporter. "Did you expect this to happen on a routine flight? What will you do next?" Other voices called out words like justice and racism. Simone focused on the path ahead and let the questions wash over her without answering. Inside the terminal, a small private conference room awaited. Simone and Carter entered, followed by 2 senior agents. The seating was arranged in a circle around a polished wooden table. Across from them sat 3 airline executives in crisp suits and a representative from the airline's legal counsel. A tray of bottled water and glasses sat untouched at the side. Carter began the meeting. "Thank you for joining us." This morning, Agent Hayes experienced an assault by Captain Robert Sinclair while on duty. He has filed a formal report with the FBI under federal law. Assault on a federal officer is a serious crime. We are here to discuss next steps. The lead executive cleared his throat and shifted papers. I want to express our deep regret for the incident. We are ready to cooperate fully. He glanced at his counsel, who we believe acted out of line but under stress. We wish to offer a confidential settlement to Agent Hayes. This would include financial compensation and mental health support. Simone felt a flicker of tension in the room. A settlement would provide quick relief for her grandmother's mounting medical expenses and spare her family further publicity. But she recalled the countless victims she had interviewed whose stories had been drowned by hush payments. She thought of her grandmother's insistence that justice was not a commodity. She looked to Carter for reassurance. Carter's gaze was firm. You understand? This is a matter of public interest and civil rights law, not solely a private dispute. The settlement offer may resolve this case quietly, but it will not address the larger pattern of discrimination we have uncovered. That is precisely why we requested this meeting. The executives shifted in their seats. One cleared his throat and said, We understand the legal team will review the evidence you have collected and coordinate with the FAA and the Department of Transportation. We respect whatever decision the Bureau makes. Simone noted that the word respect seemed weighed with diplomacy rather than genuine acceptance. After the meeting concluded, Simone and Carter walked down a long corridor toward the exit. Carter turned to Simone and said, You handled yourself perfectly up there. The pressure can be immense, but you stood firm against both prejudice and corporate influence. Simone exhaled and said, Thank you. Your support matters more than you know. Carter smiled. Truth matters even more, she replied. Then she added, Let's get you checked, and then you can decide how you wish to proceed. In the medical suite, Rachel Thompson, the bureau nurse, greeted them with a warm smile. She guided Simone to a private room where vital checks and a basic exam took place. Simone requested an STD panel and blood work to ensure no health risks from the assault. Thompson nodded professionally and collected samples. The process was routine but necessary. Simone appreciated the thoroughness and confidentiality. Afterward, Simone sat in a quiet waiting area. Carter joined her with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Simone. Here, have something warm. Meanwhile, I will speak with our legal team. She offered the other cup to Carter, who shook her head. No thanks, I already had coffee. This is better, it always is, Carter said. They sat side by side as the medical team finished the tests. Simone sipped the tea and felt a soothing warmth. She closed her eyes for a moment and allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. The assault, the betrayal, the professionalism of her witnesses, the solidarity of her allies. She thought of her grandmother lying in a hospital bed miles away. She thought of Diego, her partner, who had offered help with her case files. She thought of the families relying on her commitment to justice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diego. Agent Hayes texted, Thanks for checking in. How are you? He responded. You did great. I am here for notes and witness tracking. I smiled to myself and typed, Thanks. I will need your help with documentation and contact. Follow up. He wrote, Back you. We are in this together. Simone set the phone aside and took another sip of tea. Carter returned and said, Everything is clear medically. The tests are negative, so you are free to decide. The airline council is waiting for your response. They are prepared to increase the settlement if you prefer a private resolution, but they cannot retract the criminal referral if you choose prosecution. Simone took a deep breath. She thought of her grandmother's letter urging her to keep shining her light no matter how dark the skies became. She thought of every family she had vowed to protect with her badge. She looked at Carter and said, I respect the offer, but I believe this must be handled in court. Carter nodded and replied, "I thought you would say that. It shows your integrity and your commitment to justice. Let's make sure we coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FRA. Then we will need to prepare public statements and witness affidavits." Simone felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path would be long and challenging, but it was the right one. Outside the medical suite, a busy terminal buzzed with travelers on their own journeys. Simone stepped into the flow of passing crowds, feeling steadied by her decision. She felt the squeeze of Carter's supportive hand and smiled. The world was not perfect. Airports were full of people with power imbalances and hidden fears. But today she had confronted prejudice in its most personal form and chosen justice over comfort. She raised her chin and walked with deliberate calm through the airport concourse toward the FBI vehicles waiting at the curb. The next chapter of this flight's story would unfold in courtrooms and legislative hearings. But for now, she embraced the grounding reality of solid ground beneath her feet and the collective resolve of those who had witnessed her ordeal and chosen to stand with her. The morning sun streamed through tall windows of the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. as Simone Hayes walked into courtroom 4. The marble floors gleamed under her polished shoes. She paused at the entrance, breathing in the hush of expectation that filled the large chamber. Rows of wooden benches stretched back toward a gallery crowded with spectators, reporters, and a handful of airline employees. At the front sat Judge Eleanor Simmons, her gavel resting on a stout block of wood. To the judge's right crouched the prosecution team led by United States Attorney Monica Benson. Nobainim oi. To her left sat the defense table, where Captain Robert Sinclair and his counsel waited. Simone took her seat at the witness table beside a stack of folders and a recording device. She felt the weight of responsibility settle around her shoulders. The gravity of this trial more intense than any case file she had handled before. The press cameras whirred and the gallery hushed again as Judge Simmons called the court to order. "All rise," she intoned in a firm but measured voice. The courtroom stood until she sat and declared, "Please be seated. Today we begin the trial of United States versus Robert Sinclair on charges of assault on a federal officer and civil rights violations." Prosecutor Benson rose, her dark suit crisp, her voice clear as she addressed Judge Simmons and the jurors assembled. "Your Honor, the government will show that on January the 21st, Captain Sinclair committed a deliberate and unprovoked assault on Agent Simone Hayes solely because of her race and position. We have wristwatch recordings, phone videos, witness statements, and multiple eyewitness accounts that leave no room for doubt." As she spoke, she clicked to a screen behind her, projecting a still image from a bystander's phone, showing Sinclair leaning forward with spittle midair. The jury leaned forward in unison. Next came testimony from the first flight attendant, Mark Bennett. He recounted how he had treated all first-class passengers equally until the moment he saw Sinclair spit in Simone's face. He described the fear in her eyes and the stunned silence that followed. His calm sincerity carried weight because he had no stake in favoring prosecution. Simone watched him on the stand, noting the small tremor in his hand as he handed his badge to the bailiff. She nodded once when he confirmed that he would testify again if needed. Then Monica Benson called co-pilot Eric Dawson to the stand. He described the cockpit conversation overheard moments before the assault. Sinclair had muttered about diversity hires getting out of hand and joked about showing certain passengers their place. Eric testified that he had felt uneasy, but deferred to the captain until the assault happened. His admission that he regretted not reporting Sinclair earlier drew quiet gasps in the courtroom. Simone felt a surge of gratitude for his honesty. After a mid-morning break, the prosecution introduced video evidence captured by Alicia Chen. The CEO had recorded the confrontation on her phone and then provided the file with a timestamp. The video showed Simone politely requesting water during turbulence and Sinclair snapping back before leaning forward to spit. The courtroom lit up with murmurs at the raw clarity of the footage. Benjamin Chen sat in the gallery with her arms folded respectfully, her presence a powerful example of allyship. Simone next took the stand in her capacity as both witness and federal officer. She rose and swore on the Bible to tell the truth. Her voice was calm, but carried the natural firmness of someone confident in her own integrity. She described boarding the flight, the subtle slights in service, the captain's initial remarks about her job and her appearance, and finally, the moment of impact. She detailed the physical sensation of saliva hitting her cheek and the humiliation mingled with righteous anger. When she spoke of her immediate actions producing her credentials, gathering witness statements, and recording evidence, her words were precise, professional, and deeply personal all at once. During cross-examination, defense attorney James Hartwell leaned forward and asked his first question. Captain Hayes, would you agree that it was a hectic flight day and that turbulence can cause confusion? Isn't it possible you misinterpreted the situation? Simone met his gaze with unwavering calm. I requested water as other passengers received it. I recorded everything on my phone, and witness statements confirmed the sequence of events. It was deliberate and unprovoked. Hartwell shifted tactics. Then he asked about her grandmother's situation, her family pressures, and her career ambitions. Was she perhaps looking for an opportunity to advance publicly by creating controversy? Simone paused only briefly before answering. My grandmother's health and my career have no bearing on whether Captain Sinclair assaulted me. My focus then and now is the pursuit of justice. Hartwell paused, looked over his glasses at the jury, and then concluded without further comment. Next, the prosecution introduced testimony from a nurse who treated Simone for the assault. She confirmed the medical exam, the test conducted for safety, and the minimal physical injuries beyond the emotional trauma. On her way out, the nurse offered Simone a sympathetic glance that said more than words could express. In the afternoon session, the prosecution called retired Judge Gerald Stevens, Sinclair's former flying partner. He described decades of subtle racist comments Sinclair made in private and how he reported it years ago, only to see management dismiss his concerns. His testimony laid bare the pattern of discrimination that extended beyond a single incident. He described Sinclair's explicit belief that passengers of color did not belong in first class and his policy of letting them know their place. The jury listened in stunned silence. When evidence wrapped and closing arguments began, Prosecutor Benson spoke of the importance of accountability not only to protect Agent Hayes, but also to ensure that no one in uniform felt immune from the law. She urged the jury to send a message that racism and assault would not be tolerated at any altitude or level of authority. Defense attorney Hartwell countered with a plea for empathy toward Sinclair. He portrayed him as a pilot under extreme pressure, dealing with personal stress and momentary lapse in judgment. He asked the jury to consider his lifetime record of safe flights and ask whether a single outburst warranted a criminal conviction that could ruin a man's career. Judge Simmons instructed the jury to consider only the facts and the law. She reminded them that assault on a federal officer automatically carried certain penalties and that civil rights violations demanded serious consideration. She asked them to deliberate carefully and without prejudice. With that, the jury room door closed behind the 12 jurors. In the hushed courtroom, Simone gathered her things. She felt a swirl of emotions, relief that her testimony had been heard, yet the weight of uncertainty in waiting for the verdict. Monica Benson placed a supportive hand on Simone's shoulder. "We have done everything we can," she said softly. Simone nodded and managed a small smile. "Thank you. Let justice take its course." Outside the courtroom, the media buzzed. Channel cameras and microphones pressed toward the courthouse entrance. Simone and Benson exited quietly through a side door. They climbed into an unmarked SUV where Carter waited with the rest of the bureau team. The engine purred as the vehicle pulled away. In the back seat, Simone exhaled deeply and closed her eyes. The courtroom drama had revealed the truth. Now she would await the jury's decision. Her resolve was steady. Her mission continued. The tension in the courthouse was palpable as the jury filed back into courtroom 4. Simone Hayes sat at the prosecution table beside United States Attorney Monica Benson, her heart pounding in her chest. Across the aisle, Captain Robert Sinclair and his defense team sat erect, faces betraying varying degrees of apprehension. Judge Eleanor Simmons stood and spoke with measured authority. "Please rise for the jury." The courtroom rose in unison. The forepersons stood and held up the verdict form. "We, the jury, in the case of the United States versus Robert Sinclair, find the defendant guilty on count 1 assault on a federal officer and count 2 civil rights violations." A collective exhale rippled through the room. Simone's chest tightened in relief, and a surge of emotion threatened to overwhelm her. She reminded herself to maintain composure. Around her, applause broke out softly among spectators and law enforcement personnel. Monica Benson offered Simone a warm, proud smile. The jury foreperson returned to the jury box and took a seat. Judge Simmons called for order and pronounced sentencing guidelines will be addressed at a later date. This matter is adjourned. The gavel came down with a firm echo that resonated throughout the chamber. As the crowd stood and began to disperse, Simone allowed herself a long exhale. Every detail she had documented, every witness she had secured, every step she had taken, had led to this moment. She had transformed an act of violence into a triumph of justice. She closed her eyes for a moment and gathered her thoughts before rising from the witness table. In the hallway outside the courtroom, law enforcement agents and some airline employees offered quiet congratulations. Simone shook hands with colleagues and acknowledged their support with gratitude. She spotted Alicia Chen and Judge Marcus Wallace among the cluster of supporters. Alicia offered her a hug. "Your courage made all the difference," she whispered. Judge Wallace nodded solemnly and said justice was served. Simone felt a deep warmth in her chest at their solidarity. 2 weeks later, federal and industry leaders gathered at the Department of Transportation headquarters for a press conference announcing the Sky Equality Act. Simone stood at the back of the room beside Assistant Director Evelyn Carter. To Carter's right stood the Secretary of Transportation and several airline representatives. The bill's passage marked sweeping reforms requiring standardized bias, reporting systems, independent oversight committees, and mandatory training focused on action rather than awareness alone. As the Secretary took the podium, he began, "Today, we take an important step in ensuring every traveler is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race or background. The Sky Equality Act will establish clear protocols for investigating discriminatory incidents and create transparency in airline operations. A single courageous act brought us here today," he continued, referencing Simone's ordeal without naming her. "This legislation honors those who speak truth to power and ensures no incident is swept under the rug." Simone watched from the sidelines as reporters snapped photos and microphones bore into every word. Her gaze drifted to Carter, who gave her a proud nod. Simone pressed her lips into a steady line. She had hoped for systemic change, but seeing it enacted felt profoundly moving. She thought of every passenger who had witnessed her assault and chosen to stand with her. Their collective voices had propelled this reform, After the press conference, Simone and Carter met with the head of the FAA's Civil Rights Division to coordinate implementation of the new policies. They reviewed a timeline for rolling out anonymous reporting hotlines and guidelines for swift enforcement of consequences for perpetrators. Simone's detailed documentation from Flight AA-21045 became a training case study for airline staff and regulators. In her office at FBI headquarters, Simone found an email from a community advocacy group requesting her participation in a panel discussion on travel discrimination. She drafted a thoughtful response, expressing her willingness to share her experience and to serve as a voice for travelers who lack the privilege to demand accountability. She felt humbled by the invitation and energized by the opportunity to keep momentum for change. Late one evening, Simone sat at her desk reviewing a draft of the training materials that incorporated her case. Sections detailed the warning signs of microaggressions, steps for preserving evidence, and protocols for immediate response during flights. She inserted an anecdote about the importance of empathy and the role of bystanders in supporting victims. She titled the chapter "Witness Responsibility" and underlined the phrase, "Silence allows injustice to flourish." Her phone buzzed with a message from her grandmother, Evelyn. "I saw the news. My brave girl, you have made me proud." Simone's eyes filled with tears as she typed back, "Thank you, Mama. I couldn't have done this without your strength and wisdom." She pressed send and set the phone aside. The moment reminded her that her fight had personal resonance beyond policy and prosecution. Over the following months, Simone traveled to multiple cities, giving keynote addresses to airline associations, advocacy groups, and law enforcement forums. She spoke about the intersection of civil rights law and airline operations. She emphasized that discrimination in the skies reflected broader societal issues and that preventing it required vigilance at every level. Audiences responded with standing ovations and calls to action. Back at home, Simone visited Evelyn at the hospital. Her grandmother had recovered sufficiently from her treatments and was in good spirits. Simone brought flowers and a framed photo of her at the podium during the Sky Equality Act signing ceremony. Evelyn's eyes glistened as she studied the image. Simone placed the frame on the bedside table. "I told you, your light would change the world," Evelyn said softly. Simone leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Mama, your light guides me still." One morning, Simone boarded a routine flight from Dulles to Chicago for a conference. She felt a flutter of nerves but reminded herself of how far she had come. At the gate, she spotted Alicia and Judge Wallace again. They waved and wished her safe travels. Simone returned their smiles and stepped onto the jetway with confidence. When she settled into her seat, a flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Welcome back aboard, Agent Hayes. It's an honor to serve you." The genuine respect in his voice filled her with quiet satisfaction. As the plane taxied, she reflected on the journey. A single act of hatred had sparked an investigation, an arrest, a trial, and sweeping reforms. It had exposed a culture of protection for powerful individuals and led to accountability measures that would protect countless travelers. Justice was not a destination, but an ongoing commitment. Above the clouds, she opened her notebook and wrote a final entry in the case file's Sky Equality Act enacted, training materials published, outreach ongoing. Then she closed the notebook and gazed out the window at the sunlit sky. The world below stretched in fields, towns, and cities, but up here there was only endless possibility and the promise of better tomorrows. As the engines rumbled, Simone smiled to herself. She had navigated prejudice at 35,000 feet and emerged not only vindicated, but empowered to drive systemic change. Her grandmother's wisdom had guided every step, and her own courage had carried her through. The journey continued, but her purpose remained steadfast to ensure every person could claim their dignity in the skies and beyond. The pre-flight announcements echoed through the cabin as passengers settled into their seats. Simone Hayes buckled her seatbelt and glanced around the first-class cabin. It felt vastly different from the day she had first boarded Flight AA-2045. Then the air was charged with unseen prejudice and stunned disbelief. Now the atmosphere was one of genuine warmth and respect. A new flight path had opened not only for her, but for travelers everywhere. The flight attendant approached Simone with a welcoming smile. "Mr. Dawson has already briefed us on your story, and we want to make sure your journey today is as comfortable as possible." She tilted her head toward the galley where Captain Sinclair's replacement, Captain Laura Martinez, was visible through the cockpit door. Captain Martinez waved and offered a sincere nod. Simone returned the gesture. The sight of a female captain at the helm in that uniform reminded her how much the skies had changed. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Simone reflected on the months since her trial. She had spent countless hours in meetings, public forums, and legislative hearings. She had watched the airline industry adopt bias reporting systems and independent oversight committees. She had collaborated with the FAA and Department of Transportation on mandatory training that went beyond awareness to focus on real-world solutions. She had testified before Congress and seen bipartisan support for the Sky Equality Act. Progress had been remarkable, but in many ways, it was just the beginning. The engines roared and the plane accelerated down the runway. Simone glanced at the window as the ground fell away, and the world below receded into fields and highways. She felt a familiar thrill of lift off. The sensation of leaving the ground held both freedom and responsibility. She was free to pursue her next assignment, but responsible for maintaining the reforms she had helped establish. She reached for her in-flight tablet and opened the training materials she had authored. The screen displayed an outline titled, "Cultivating Dignity in the Skies." She scrolled through sections on recognizing microaggressions, preserving evidence, responding to discrimination, and empowering bystanders. She paused on a testimonial from a flight attendant who credited the new programs for giving him the confidence to intervene when he witnessed a passenger being marginalized. She smiled, knowing that small changes could ripple outward to create large impact. A gentle vibration signaled that the seatbelt sign would soon turn off. Simone put away her tablet and reached into her bag for a well-worn journal. She opened to the first page where she had written, "Flight AA-2045 Incident." Below that was a string of dates, notes, and reflections. She turned to the last blank page and began to write, "Flight New Assignment, December 15th. Next Community Panel Discussion. Chicago." She added a bullet, "Participate in training workshop for new airline staff." She underlined the word community and paused to let the significance sink in. A voice came over the intercom welcoming passengers and inviting them to explore the in-flight entertainment system. Simone pressed play on a documentary about pioneering aviators of color. She watched profiles of pilots who defied barriers in the 20th century. She saw the determination in their eyes and the pride in their voices. Their stories resonated with her own journey and reminded her that progress often required courage passed down through generations. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alicia Chen. "Thank you again for everything. We are rolling out your case study across our global offices." Simone typed back, "You are making a difference, and so are your teams." She pressed send and slipped the phone into her pocket. She closed her journal and leaned back, letting the hum of the engines lull her into quiet reflection. Ahead of her, 3 rows of seatbacks formed a wall of comfort screens and plush headrests. The first-class cabin smelled faintly of lavender from the scented towels offered earlier. The soft lighting created a calming space in contrast to the harsh glare of spotlights she had endured during the trial. She felt gratitude for that transformation. The captain's voice returned on the intercom. "Good afternoon. This is Captain Martinez. We have reached cruising altitude at 35,000 feet. The skies are clear ahead, and we should have a smooth flight. I want to welcome Agent Hayes and all of our travelers today. Your safety and comfort are our top priorities." Simone appreciated the sincerity in her tone. It was a marked departure from the clipped formality she had faced before. She gazed out the window at the clouds stretching endlessly. The landscape above was both a testament to human achievement and a reminder of nature's immensity. She thought of the systemic barriers she had challenged and the new pathways that had opened. She thought of her grandmother Evelyn Brooks, whose unwavering wisdom had guided her. Her grandmother's letter had said, "Keep shining your light no matter how dark the skies become." Simone realized that her own light had not only shone, but had illuminated a path for many others. A steward offered her a tray with a light meal of smoked salmon salad and fresh fruit. Simone accepted graciously. She savored each bite and allowed herself a moment of normalcy. The simple pleasure of a well-prepared dish felt emblematic of the dignity now expected for every traveler. She finished her meal and folded the napkin with care. Around her, passengers began to engage with the training video optional module now available on their screens. Simone noticed Alicia Chen scrolling through a slide on bystander intervention. Judge Marcus Wallace was reading a speech outline for an upcoming civil rights symposium. Flight attendant Mark Bennett was reviewing the new service protocols from the flight deck. Each person contributed to a culture of respect and accountability. Simone tapped her journal again and wrote, "Observation culture shift tangible even mid-flight." She smiled at the rhythm of her own words. Transformation did not happen overnight, but it was happening. She closed her journal and let her thoughts rest. Suddenly, the plane encountered a brief patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Simone's fingers twitched for a moment at the armrests, but she remembered her training and her grandfather's advice to remain calm. She took a slow breath and exhaled. The turbulence passed as quickly as it had arrived. She felt the reassurance of practice and preparedness. The pilot's voice returned, "Thank you for remaining seated. We have passed the turbulence and will resume regular service shortly. We apologize for the inconvenience." Simone appreciated the clarity and courtesy. She thought of the days when passengers were told to stay silent or brushed aside. Now transparency and empathy guided the response. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin lights brightened. Simone looked around and saw no lingering hesitation, just a collective nod of resilience. She felt pride in what had been achieved. In the weeks that followed this flight, Simone's case study would become a cornerstone of training programs across multiple airlines. Travelers would learn to speak up. Crews would learn to intervene, and corporations would learn they could no longer look away. Simone's own career would continue to advance as she took on a new role overseeing the FBI's expanded Civil Rights Enforcement Division. She carried her grandmother's framed graduation photo in her new office as a reminder of the journey that had brought them here. As the plane touched down in Chicago, Simone unbuckled her seatbelt and gathered her things. She stood and offered a gentle nod to Captain Martinez and the crew. "Thank you for a wonderful flight," she said earnestly. "You have set a new standard." The captain and crew smiled brightly. "You too, Agent Hayes. Thank you for inspiring us." She stepped onto the jetway with purpose. Walking through O'Hare International Airport, Simone felt the solidity of the ground beneath her feet. She breathed in the crisp December air and let a wave of gratitude wash over her. The new flight path she had charted was more than a career milestone. It was a testament to what one person's courage could achieve when guided by principle and supported by allies. She retrieved her phone and called her grandmother Evelyn. Hearing her grandmother's voice filled her heart with warmth. "Hi, Mom, I just landed in Chicago." She laughed softly. "I wish you were here to celebrate." She replied, "I'll be here soon. Give me the newest training materials." Her eyes sparkled as she spoke. Even from the hospital bed, Evelyn's spirit remained unbreakable. Simone smiled and said, "I will send them right away." Hanging up, she looked around the bustling airport. People of all backgrounds hurried to consoles. Families embraced after reunions. Travelers moved with purpose. Simone felt a sense of connection and belonging. She had helped transform an industry long overdue for change. She had harnessed prejudice and turned it into progress. Now she walked confidently into her next chapter, guided by her grandmother's light and her own unwavering commitment to justice. We've witnessed how one woman's dignity defied a captain's contempt, transforming an assault at 35,000 feet into a landmark victory for civil rights. Simone Hayes' unwavering determination reminds us that compassion and courage can pierce through prejudice, even in the most isolated places. Her fight wasn't just personal. It was a stand for every traveler who's ever felt unseen or unwelcome. As we close this chapter, let's carry forward that spark of solidarity. Condemn discrimination wherever it hides. Champion the voices of those who speak truth to power. And never forget that change takes collective action. If Simone's journey moved you, show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Stay tuned for more powerful stories that inspire us to keep fighting for justice in the skies and beyond.